V. Sriram today will speak about women Carnatic musicians as we celebrate women power. Shakti during this festival. V. Sriram is known for his passion for Chennai's history and Carnatic music. He writes frequently on these subjects for the Hindu and Madras musings. He is the author of several books and has pioneered the concept of heritage walks in the city. Over to you, Sri.
Thank you, Sriram. So it's a little Advaitic, one Sriram thanking the other, ultimately all being one and the same. So yesterday we had Saraswati Puja. We all worshipped the goddess Saraswati, put up the veenas and the tamburas and the violins and the books, and then worshipped this feminine form, or sacred feminine form for knowledge. Saraswati has been worshipped since I do not know how long in Indian mythology. Arrives as the mind-born daughter of Brahma, then becomes the wife of Brahma over a period of time, and was a river at one time. So many things. But it's taken a long while for the real-life Saraswatis to get to center stage in the world of South Indian classical music, which is the the area that I propose to explore along with you today. The Saraswatis are still evolving. They are still arriving center stage. I can't say that they have arrived center stage. They fight any number of biases on a daily basis, on a day-to-day basis, in taking to this profession, which in the music academy's Virudu is most famously declared as this most ancient art of arts. The academy itself took till 1968 to recognize that a woman could be awarded the highest accolade in Carnatic music, that of the Sangeeta Kalanidhi. And it took the Music Academy 13 years of infighting to finally agree that a woman could be recognized with that award. Because the first proposal that a woman could be recognized with the title of Sangeeta Kalanidhi was proposed in 1955. It took them 13 years to overcome their internal biases and then finally accept that yes, women can be given this particular award. And it goes on, it hasn't ended. But yes, in the last 100 years, things have changed quite a bit. I propose to just take you down the route that women artists have taken over the last several centuries in the field of the performing arts and the challenges that they have faced. If there is a pattern or a formula that emerges at the end of it, that is entirely to your own credit. I haven't been able to find any. So this is a photograph of Thanjavur Veena Bhashini Ammal sitting in the middle with all her other women in her troupe, just prior to enacting the Sharabendra Bhupala Kuravanji in the Thanjavur big temple. And the photograph itself is probably a century old now. You can see, as Namita Devi Dayal very famously wrote in her music room about Kesarbai Kerkar sitting in a photograph, like a man with her legs spread out and all the 5 fingers played like that on each thigh. And there was hardly any feminine grace in the photograph. That is what Namita Devi Dayal wrote in her book. And then she asks her guru, Dondutai Kulkarni, as to why Kesarbai is sitting like that. Dondutai does not give a reply, but she describes Kesarbai's life. And in that process, you get to understand that Kesarbai had to be a man in order to fight the male world in the arts. And so in the process lost quite a bit of her feminine graces and kind of removed that element in herself in order to shine as a musician. So that is really, I found that a coincidence that these women were also sitting in similar fashion in this photograph. So our journey begins with the Thanjavur Brihadishwara temple, where ironically Veena Bhashini was photographed 100 years ago. But this temple, as you know, is just over 1,000 years now. And this has perhaps one of the earliest inscriptions that describes the fact that several women were dedicated to this temple. And it talks about the various roles that they need to perform in order to be employed in the temple. And it talks about how the women have been sourced from various other temples where they have been dedicated, then they have been brought here, they have been given houses. They are called the Talicheri Pendir. That is, they are the women who are part of the temple, the house of the Lord, They are dedicated to the temple, their duties are described in the inscription. If there is a retirement policy, there is a rehiring policy, there is a recruitment policy, there is a passing on from one generation to the other. What happens if a woman grows old? She has to train somebody who is junior, who has to take over her roles and responsibilities, and that is how that woman will inherit the property that is held by the first woman for the duties and services that she has performed for the temple. So these were women who were technically married to the deity, Devadasis or handmaidens of the Lord. And you will find that for the first 900 years, the role of music and dance is common. Musicians danced, dancers sang. And as dancers grew old, they sat down and performed, they became musicians. Beyond the age of 35 or 40, they would sit down, they would perform abhinayam, what was known as kai pidikkirathu, and then that is all that they would do. They would not stand up and dance. So that really the basis of all that begins with this temple. The women were, as I said, married to the deity. Now as long as you had a king like Rajaraja or Rajendra, everything worked well. Now the moment the kingdoms became weak, the women were deprived of their income that was coming to them from the temple, and they had to look at other means or other resources to keep themselves going. In any case, most of the landholders and the priests cohabited with many of these women. They had children through these women, and the daughter was always a prized possession because she would be able to carry on the tradition. She would also inherit all the property that the mother possessed. That would be movable or immovable or any of its kind. The son was always a liability, which is why even today in several Brahmin families, if on a Friday evening you switched off all the lights, there is a common expression. Why is it that you are seated as though a courtesan has given birth to a male child? So that is because it is very ironic that in the rest of the country, the male child was cherished. Everybody prayed for a male child, but here they prayed for a female child. Secondly, this was the only community of women that was educated. Rest of the Indian women were just not educated. Even in royal families, they were only educated up to a certain point. Whereas here, they could conduct conversations, they knew all the social graces, they could quote from Sanskrit, they could quote from 2 or 3 different languages, they could hold their own in a symposium of poets or scholars, and above all, they had no widowhood. Widowhood, which kind of damned every woman in India till very recently, was not known to these women. Their husband had no role beyond that of being a patron and a procreator of the line, of the lineage. That's about it. They were always married to the deity. Whether the deity was a male or a female, it did not matter. The Devadasi was dedicated to the temple. And when she died, the deity would observe a period of mourning by closing the temple doors, and the last raiment that the Devadasi's body wore would come from the garment that the deity was wearing on that day. The flame would be lit from the lamp that was burning in the temple kitchen. And that is how the wife of the Lord would be sent away. Now it all reads very well on paper. But in practice, as the kings weakened and as empires came and went, most of them depended on physical patrons, and patrons were not the most faithful of people, and therefore there was a lot of other malpractices that kind of stepped into the system. The men were always a liability in the profession, and they had no role, or they did not have anything to do. So invariably, if they were talented, they became drummers, or they became pipers, Nagaswaram artists, or Matalam. They became dance masters. And in case they were none of these, they degenerated to the role of a pimp. That is what the men were invariably up to. You must also remember that such talents were not given to everybody. Even among the women, only a small percentage of the women would have the talents that could be used for dancing or for singing or for performing roles and responsibilities in the temple or in the houses of the rich and the famous. So most of the women also did not have a profession that they could get into. Poverty was quite rampant, and the caste system conveniently exploited these women. So it was in every way a great system of exploitation conjoined with the most sophisticated of arts. So it was a very, very ironic scenario in which the whole thing existed for a very, very long time. The heart of this whole tradition starts from the Thiruvarur temple, the famous Tyagaraja Swami, whom you see over here, the deity whose body has never been seen by anybody. The deity is perpetually covered with flowers and garment, and even during the anointing of the deity, they place a certain screen all over the deity so that you can only see the face of the deity. In fact, there are songs that the courtesans were very famously known for, dedicated to the Tyagaraja Swami. Mugatte Katiye Dekam, that is, you have only shown your face and you have always hidden your body. Is it not because you have got some fatal flaw in your entire body? Either your leg is deformed or you've got a crooked back. Even when I come to see you when you're bathing, you hide under a screen. So tell me, what is the secret that you are forever hiding yourself like this? Now you can see here that this is the main deity, and on this side there is his companion, the consort. The consort here is not Parvati, she is Katyayani, the first of the concubines of the Lord. So she is also known as Kondi Ammai. And every year during the temple festival, when the chariot is about to leave, it is Kondi Ammai's permission that is first taken before the chariot of the Lord leaves. When he comes back, Kondi Ammai will be present in order to ward the evil eye of the deity. Till just a few years ago, the last of the courtesans of Thiruvarur, P.R. Tilakam, used to perform that ritual. They would tie a turban around her head, and then she would touch the chariot wheel, and then the chariot would be dragged off. Then at the end of it, she would come, she would apply paste on Tyagaraja and ward off the evil eye from him, and then he would be taken into the temple. So this was the status in Thiruvarur, and it is from here that the tradition really begins. And then with the coming of the Vijayanagar Empire and successive empires, like the Tanjavur Nayaks and all that, things changed and the courtesan tradition continued, but as multiple languages came into the tradition, the women became more and more accomplished. The music that they practiced became richer in terms of its language. So what was at one time just Tamil, later on had Sanskrit, then it had Telugu, then it had Kannada, it also had Marathi being brought in with the arrival of the Maratha rulers. So an enormous corpus of songs was present with these women musicians who practiced. But they were, this is a portrait of the Tanjavur Darbar Hall with a group of musicians and instrumentalists. You don't find any women here. You find that they are all men. And in the time of Sharaboji, who was the penultimate ruler of, by the time of Sharaboji rather, the penultimate ruler of Tanjavur, English had also been added to the various talents that the women musicians was expected to have. So you had the orchestra which had been brought in by Sharaboji, and he had brought in the clarinet, he had brought in the pianoforte, he had brought in the violin, all from England. And many of these women were the forerunners in learning these instruments and performing them. You had the British national anthem translated into Sanskrit by Muthuswami Dikshita. You had several other songs. You had what was known as the Salam Jatulu, which was the dance that you performed before the king, all of which acquired a certain Western kind of a tinge. And all of these were performed by the courtesans in Sharaboji's court. What was also forgotten was that during this entire long journey, many of these women had also looked upon eroticism as much their prerogative as it was that of the men. By the time Sharaboji had come, it was not expected of the courtesans to kind of publicly flaunt their expectations out of an act of lovemaking, which is why works of a predecessor generation like Mudupalani and all that had been completely forgotten. The only surviving erotic work written by a woman by the time of Sharaboji was a work called Radhika Santwanamu, The Satisfying of Radha, written by a courtesan of 3 generations prior to Sharaboji, a woman called Mudupalani. By the time Sharaboji had come, Mudupalani had been forgotten. It had more or less come to be believed that it was a man called Muthupalani who had written that particular work, because it was not expected of a woman to have written such a work. So this was the kind of society in which they lived. Ironically, this was also when dance reached its pinnacle, because the four talented brothers whom you see here, Vadivelu, Sivanandam, Chinnaya and Ponnaya, collectively known as the Tanjavur Quartet, who were all disciples of Muthuswami Dikshitha, they kind of gave the finishing touches to the dance format, which is known as the Margam today. And this is supposed to be Dasi Kamalam, who is dancing in front of the four great dance masters. Kamalam was also a disciple of Muthuswami Dikshitha, incidentally. So you had dance reaching its pinnacle, you had music also having reached a certain height, but at the same time, these were not socially acceptable people. If at all, you had people who, if you look at the listing of musicians up to say 1914 or so, you will not find even a single woman listed among the musicians. You will find only male musicians, and very interestingly, the male musicians were across many castes. And similarly, you had a fairly good sprinkling of Christian musicians as well coming into the Carnatic music fold at that time, but that is outside the purview of this talk, so I am not going to go into that. But that's a very fascinating period. But women were not listed in any chronicling of musicians and scholars. So it was that they were needed for entertainment, their music was listened to, but they were not considered to be anything great or worthy. And they also had a number of restrictions in terms of their performances, which I will come to later. Now, opinion by the time of Sharaboji was strongly divided on what kind of role these women really played. So, if you look at our Puranas, and if you look at something like Sekirar's Periya Purana, there is this famous incident of Neelakantha Nayanar, a very chaste man, living very happily with his wife, goes to the Chidambaram temple every day, worships and comes back. A pretty boring life. But one day, what happens to Neelakantha Nayanar is that he goes and worships in the temple, and then it begins to pour with rain. Now in Chidambaram, it's a little difficult to get lost even if it's pouring with rain. But the incredible does happen, and Neelakantha Nayanar Thiruneelakantha is lost. And he takes shelter in a particular street where all the courtesans are living. He takes shelter in a veranda, and the woman who is living inside notices that there is a man outside, opens the door, welcomes him in, and then entertains him for the night, takes care of him. Next day in the morning, he goes back to his house. Now, Sekirar writes that Taratil Irangi Vittar. He came down in his stature. Now, he does not write what happened or anything. He just says he came down in his stature because he went to the house of a courtesan. Now, his wife, who notices that there is something different about him today. He is looking more, kind of effulgent. He is looking more fragrant, etc. He is more fragrant than what he is as usual. He suspects. And then that night when they are both very young, right? So he comes near her and puts his hand on and tells him, Thindu Veera ini emmai Thiruneelakantha. Will you touch us anymore in the name of Neelakantha? And then he has the shock of his life. He says, hereafter, I have forsworn all women, including my own wife. Then the rest of the story. It's a longish story. I'm not going into that. But what I'm trying to tell you is that this is that one instance of a courtesan appearing in the story of a Nayanar. And his whole life is destroyed because of the fact that he went one night to take shelter in a courtesan's house. So, how evil was the concept of a courtesan? This is Sekirar writing in the Periya Puranam in the 12th or the 13th century or some such thing. So, even then there was this feeling that women who practiced in the arts were evil. And so, by the time of Tyagaraja, it has become more so. And Tyagaraja is one of the foremost among the greatest of the Carnatic composers. At the same time, a man who had very, very, how shall I put it, in the 21st century, you can only say he had very outmoded views when it came to women. But in his time, he was definitely one of several. He was not alone. So, for instance, in his Durugu Gala, he says, Vanitalu Natavita Shudrulaku, I have taught music to women, I have taught music to dancing and entertaining Shudra. So he kind of combines the two of them and he laments that I have committed this sin, who is going to come and protect me? And for everything he blames the woman. So for instance, in Enthane Echina, he says, no matter what has happened, no matter what you have seen, every man is a slave to woman. Then in Yenta Muddo, he says that do not go near them because, Menu Juchi Mosa Bokave Manasa, he says don't go near them because they will practice all their wiles on you and they will ruin you. So this is the kind of opinion that Tyagaraja has about women and about women artists, they more so. On the other hand, his compatriot Muthuswami Dikshita, completely comfortable in the courtesan environment. Totally. In fact, many of his disciples were practicing courtesans, many of his disciples were Nagaswaram artists. It is very interesting that Tyagaraja, who wrote the greatest of philosophy, combining it with the most day-to-day occurrences in society. So he kind of combined the highest thoughts with the most kind of everyday happening. Like for instance, somebody going out, leaving their door open, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that Tyagaraja brings into his songs. He was not wanting to get involved with the courtesan or the women musicians. On the other hand, Muthuswami Dikshita, who wrote the most high-flown Sanskrit, the greatest of philosophy, was completely comfortable cohabiting with all these women and did not look at caste as a kind of barrier for teaching music. In fact, it's very ironic that most of his disciples were not Brahmins. That is the very, very strange thing that you observe. Then you come to Madras. By 1639, Madras is a thriving city, and the kingdoms of the hinterland have all become weak and they are losing out, and most of the musicians are migrating to Madras. You have the concept of the Dubashas, the men who knew two languages, who translated for the English and the locals. They were enormously rich, and in order to establish their status in society, they wanted musicians and dancers and others to join their retinue. So one of the earliest works on Madras is called the Sarvadeva Vilasa. It's a Sanskrit book. It's an incomplete work. But that very clearly mentions 4 or 5 great Dubashas of Madras, and in the listing it also includes the courtesans who were there in each of these Dubashas retinues. And it also traces their origin. It says somebody came from Kumbakonam, somebody is from Tanjavur. So a courtesan of Madras was not something very great. You had to establish your lineage and say that I come from Tanjavur, I come from Kumbakonam, so that people know what is your background in the arts. And so those women they came here. And this is, of course, building is not there anymore, but this used to be Manali House, where probably several of the courtesans performed in the 1st or the 2nd century of Madras. The English also began to witness several of these Nautch performances. In the north, of course, the English married or cohabited with the courtesans and called them bibis, but in the south you did not have that concept. The High Court of Madras came into existence in 1862, and the first case was between 2 courtesans. It was over rights of adoption between 2 women. Now, from then on, the entire community of women musicians was judged on the basis of English law. And English law could not recognize what is a free woman who did not marry, who had children outside of marriage, who took the name of the mother, who had her own right to property, who could take on any number of patrons. The only terminology that they had was that of a prostitute. So that all these women were branded in common with the women who were selling themselves for money. So the English law just did not look at them differently, and Indians who were educated in the Western system also followed the same. In fact, they became even more harsher than the British themselves. And so they were subject to a series of court rulings, each one more negative than the other. Not in terms of the actual judgment. The actual judgment, if you read it, Sati Muthuswami Iyer's judgments and all that, he makes a judgment very clearly between, say, one woman and the other and her rights, etc. But what is very unfortunate is all of them in their judgment write at least one paragraph or two on how negative this whole thing is, this should be abolished, we should look upon the government to do something about it, and so on. So there is a great build-up for it, brought to a great culmination by a man called Kandukuri Veeresalingam Pantulu, the great reformer, social reformer of Andhra, who advocated widow marriage, who advocated the abolition of the Devadasi system, and then when he had to get married a young woman. Not from any of these communities. But Veeresalingam Pantulu, incidentally, was the great kind of the social reformer of his times. Lots of people looked up to him. It was at his advice that the Mysore Darbar said that hereafter no more courtesans in our palace, we will withdraw them all. Most of them had to leave and settle in other places once he influenced the Mysore Darbar. And similarly, he was also working his ways in Madras. Now this is the time when we get to hear of some of the great women musicians. And before I start off on them, I must also tell you that they operated with certain restrictions. So a woman musician was not expected to put her talam forcefully on her thigh, because this was considered to be unfeminine. Secondly, a woman musician was not expected to sing tanam. You know what tanam is, some of you. The ragam, tanam, pallavi, the middle portion with the middle tempo when you sing it, it's called the tanam, with just the syllables a, nam and tam. That is all you sing. So they were not expected to sing tanam, so where several of them would take to the veena and perform the tanam in that, in order to kind of not have themselves enunciate the syllables of the tanam. Thirdly, there is no logic for any of this, so it was just the rule that existed there. Thirdly, they were all considered to be weak in mathematics, therefore Pallavis were out of bounds as far as they were concerned. So Pallavi was always the male prerogative. That too, the vocal musician, the male musician, he would perform the Pallavi. The woman musician could not perform Pallavi under any circumstance. So these were some of the rules and regulations under which they had to operate. Next thing, and that is a battle that women musicians are fighting even today. How many accompanists would be willing to perform along with a woman? So if they accepted performances along with a woman artist, male artists would not use them thereafter. That hasn't changed. It's still going on even today. So no matter how different the world has gone, it's come a full circle on several things, this hasn't changed. So there were certain mridangam artists and violinists who were known only for accompanying female musicians. And in those days, you know, the female musicians came from the courtesan community. So it was under such circumstances that you had Kanchipuram Danakoti Ammal, one of the most well-known women musicians of her time. And this is early 1900. And you have technology coming up now, rapidly. Recording has come, and the English recording company, that is the Gramophone and Typewriter Limited, GTTL as it was known at the time, they wanted to record Indian artists. So they send their manager, Frederick William Gaisberg, to Madras. He comes to Calcutta, he records Calcutta Goharjan and he records Janki Bai. Then he comes to Madras, and not one male artist is willing to come forward and record his voice. The reason is that there is a fear that there is a spirit or a genie which sits in the horn which sucks out your life when you sing into it. Because it's a purely mechanical process. There is a huge horn into which you have to shout, because the vibration of that diaphragm has to move the needle, which in turn will etch the voice on a wax cylinder. Then the wax cylinder will be sent to Germany or wherever to be pressed. It would come back as a shellac disc several months later. So men were not willing to record their voices. The first three South Indian artists, ironically even in the north it was Goharjan and Janki Bai. In the south also the first three women who recorded were Danakoti and Bengaluru Nagaratnamma and Coimbatore Thai. These were the three women who recorded their voices in 1905. And they would have had to travel to Bangalore to record, because the first recordings happened there and not here, because it was believed that the weather in Madras was not conducive to recording. So a makeshift tent would be put up inside the sound engineer's hotel room. And the Gaisberg himself writes that all of them dressed in their best to come to the recording studio. As though it was a kind of a public performance. They wore all their jewels and came, because for them it was something new. It was a great experience, and they were not afraid of the genie that was sitting inside the recording machine and that was going to consume their voice. They came, they recorded. Now, I'm sorry I'm not playing any audio because there's some issue, but then I just wanted to tell you, Danakoti had this very famous incident where, you know, she was very well known for her Ramanataka Kirtanes in Tamil. And Danakoti is all set to perform in a concert when a young man stands up and says, "Hey Danakoti, Ramanatakatle or part padu." So she starts off by Yarada Kurange, which is Ravana's song when he sees Hanuman for the first time. And then the young man is, he's kind of silenced forever. So that was the kind of personality that Kanchipuram Danakoti Ammal was. Danakoti was a very, very popular performing artist who had given concerts all over South India, and then had an early advent of a disease called dropsy, which I think is an enlarged, is fluid collection in the cardiac sac or whatever it is, and then did not live very long after that. Her compatriot or contemporary at that time was Veena Dhanammal, whom you see sitting in the middle there, and with her 4 formidable daughters, 2 on either side, 2 standing, and a lot of grandchildren all around. Dhanamma, if Dhanakoti was a very popular performing artist, Dhanamma was exactly the opposite. Dhanamma could sing beautifully, but decided that the veena was her instrument and took to it, not the most popular of choices. Even today, if you find 1,000 people going to a Carnatic vocal performance, you'll find 100 people going to a veena, because it requires that much more refinement to appreciate what the veena is all about. Dhanammal decided that if the veena was difficult enough, she also decided that she didn't need anybody to come and listen to her performances. So you had to fight your way through Dhanammal's forbidding exterior to get into her inner circle and then listen to her performances, which happened only at home and only on Friday evenings, and for 1.5 hours. That's about it. And the room was probably, I have seen that room, so it's from that black screen to just where Kavita is sitting. That's about it. So even that is, I think, a little bit of an exaggeration. So not more than 20 people could have sat and witnessed the performances. But everybody in the artist community was terrified of Veena Dhanammal, and that was something that she maintained till the very end. So the street would be silenced when she performed. So the people who came to listen to the music would shoo away the vendors. Cooking would be stopped in all the neighboring houses so that she could perform in the piece that she was accustomed to. If anybody made noise, she would open her mouth and they would be showered with a flood of invective. And they would have to, it was better that they left. Most people preferred, 8 o'clock was when the cannon would boom from Fort St. George. And then Dhanammal would put down her veena. But by the time the last tram would have already left, people were so afraid of getting up and leaving that they would wait and walk all the way to Mylapore from Georgetown without getting up in the middle. So today, at 8 o'clock when the serial is starting, you find everybody getting up and leaving. Dhanammal would have found a certain formula to kind of... But Dhanammal hardly recorded. And the one recording experience that she had, which was of 8 discs, was a bad experience because it didn't sell. People didn't like just the veena with a little bit of voice coming in here and there, and no mridangam accompaniment of any kind. And finally, the Gramophone Company of India wanted her to repay the advance that they had paid her. Matter went to court. Dhanammal won the case thanks to a great fan of hers who fought her case for her. And then finally, they never recorded her music. So just around 8 discs now survive. Narasa Rao, who later became Advocate General of Andhra, he is the guy who fought the case for her. The other woman in this trio was Bengaluru Nagaratnamma, of whom I can conduct a full presentation, but I am going to restrict myself. Nagaratnamma, abandoned by father, and Nagaratnamma's mother was abandoned by her patron. And so it was a life of great struggle. The mother died early. Nagaratnamma was taught by her uncle and then by other musicians, became the courtesan in the Mysore court when she was just 14 or 15. Then when the Maharaja died, became the companion of the Chief Justice of the Mysore court, Justice T. Narahari Rao. When he died, came to Madras and was taken care of by Kasturi Rangayengar of the Hindu, and became one of the wealthiest women in Madras city. In 1905, she was paying income tax on an annual income of 2 lakhs of rupees. And she, when she went out, it was always in a coach and 6 with several maids and retinue people following. There was a moneylender of Georgetown, C.S. Rajaratna Mudaliar, who became her patron and chief. And he taught her how to invest her money well. And when you find Nagaratnamma's will in 1952, you find fixed deposits, post office savings, all kinds of things. So Nagaratnamma was taught how to invest financially very well, and her money kind of kept multiplying itself. And Nagaratnamma performed widely. Along with all this, she also invented a new kind of a tambura where you didn't have to carry this whole tambura when you traveled, because she traveled so much, it became a bit of a pain. So she invented a tambura where the stem could be dismantled into 3 pieces and put inside the drum. and could be just carried and then assembled within 5 minutes into a proper tambura with strings and all that, just before a performance began. Remarkable woman. In 1909, rediscovered that Muddu Pazhani's Radhika Santwanamu that I told you about, and published it at her own expense with a preface. And in that preface, damned Veeresalingam Pantulu for all that he stood for. And said that, he says that Veeresalingam Pantulu, incidentally, just prior to that book coming out, had done a listing of Telugu poets in which he had included Muddu Pazhani, the courtesan. He had recognized her as a woman. And he said that this Radhika Santwanamu is an obscene and shameless work, and it is not surprising because it is written by a woman who has no shame. She is after all a harlot or a courtesan. Her name was Muddu Pazhani, and he uses the derogatory forms of address in Telugu like Idi and Dani and all that when he writes of her. So Nagaratnama counters this and says that Veeresalingam Pantulu himself has recommended 12 books to the Madras University for teaching Telugu. Each one of them is more erotic than the Radhika Santwanamu. So they are considered to be great works of art because they are written by men. This, on the other hand, is considered to be a shameless work because it's written by a woman, and that too a woman of my own community who is a courtesan. Then comes the clincher. She says, what shame are you talking about? In my profession, our dharma is not to have any shame. Eroticism is our profession, and our dharma is to be shameless. Just as it is necessary for a housewife to be chaste, for a courtesan it is necessary not to be chaste. So we are only bringing out what we believe as our life. So there is no way that this book can in any way be considered inferior. So they get it released. Veeresalingam is not quiet. He demands the banning of the book. That becomes the first work to be tried for obscenity under the Indian Penal Code, under the Government of India. And finally it is proscribed. The publisher is, that is Vavila Ramaswamy Shastrulu and Sons. They are brought to court. Nagaratnama for some reason is not tried, but the book is banned, and it remains banned till 1948, when post-independence it is brought back into circulation. In 1921, Nagaratnama discovers the Tyagaraja Aradhana the Tyagaraja Samadhi in Thiruvayur, goes there and finds that it is in a pitiable condition because musicians come once a year to pay obeisance to Tyagaraja, but they don't take care of it after that. And so she then, what she does is that she buys up the entire property and begins building a temple for Tyagaraja on top of it. Completes it in 1926 using her own money, and then finds that on Aradhana day she is prevented from entering the temple because the male musicians tell her that women have no role to perform in the Aradhana. So she says, well, if that is so, I will perform a parallel Aradhana behind the Samadhi. So she conducts a parallel Aradhana at the rear, and you know where all the crowds went thereafter. And the male Aradhana kind of begins to weaken over a period of time. Finally, in 1941, the Aradhanas are all united. Nagaratnama graciously grants permission to the Tyagaraja Aradhana to perform in the Samadhi and says that it will continue to happen there as long as women artists are allowed to perform in front of Tyagaraja. She's mentioned it in her will in 1952. And then in 1952, when she dies, she is buried facing Tyagaraja. The old man must have squirmed and built the Samadhi. The flowers came from Salem Chellappa Ammal every year. The silver came from Padmasini Bai for the Samadhi. The electrification was finally done by Kolar Rajamma, yet another musician. So Tyagaraja somewhere was taught a very, very bitter lesson by Nagaratnama and her friends. And the two things that I forgot to mention in all this is Aradhana was unified, temple was built, everything was done. Then a group of Brahmins came and told her, there is one thing that we can do that you can never do. And she said, what is that? They said, we do the Shraddham for Tyagaraja, which you can never do. You are after all a woman. She said, that's fine, I have the money for it. So catches hold of a group of Brahmins and says, come and do the Shraddham in my house from tomorrow. So they say, we'll do it, but then we can't eat the food that you cook. She says, okay, I'll organize a Brahmin cook for you. So what is it that you want in return? She says, when you finish the Shraddham, put the Akshadaya on my head and say all the phalam is for you. They are willing to do it for the money, right? So at the end of it, the Shraddham is also conducted by her. One thing she never did was perform the Unchavritti, which is the ritual of seeking alms before the Tyagaraja Aradhana, when the male musicians will all come out in procession with a portrait of Tyagaraja. That was left to be done after she died by Brindama, Muktama and M.S. Subbalakshmi. One morning they decided that they will join the Unchavritti. Nobody said a thing. And they continued, and after that women are allowed to be part of the Unsavutti. Let's continue. This is the house of, not the house, this is a mandapam in a street called Natupilliyar Kovil Street in Georgetown. I put this up because there is no photograph of the woman that I'm going to talk about, and there is no record of her house either. All I know is that she lived on the street. This was Coimbatore Thai, the third of the first recording artists. Thai died sometime in the 1920s, if I'm not mistaken, but her records continued to be the top selling records of the gramophone company till 1940 or 45. And Thai in 1911 or 1912, her records have reached Europe, they are selling in Paris, they are selling in London, they are selling everywhere. And there is a composer called Maurice Delage, who belongs to this Kiwi shoe polish company family. And Delage is near blind, he is highly short-sighted, but he is very involved with music, and he hears Thai's performances on the gramophone and tells his parents that we must go to India and we must visit this woman called Thai. So they are on a worldwide trip to see all their shoe polish factories. When they come here, they come to Madras, and Delage comes to Natupilliyar Kovil Street, meets up with Thai. How Delage spoke to Thai, how Thai spoke to Delage, I have no idea. But Delage has written that when she sang Tanam, it sent shivers up his spine. And he then composed 4 symphonies, of which one is called Madras, and that is dedicated to the memory of Coimbatore Thai. So this was the kind of impact that somebody sitting in Madras had all the way in Paris.
So they could sing Tanam in private? In private?
In private.
Okay.
She's done it, so she's demonstrated it.
Okay.
And then you had Thiruvarur Rajai, who was supposed to have been the finest musician of her times, but refused to record her voice. She said, I do not want my music to be played in tea shops and hair cutting saloons. That is the way they were played invariably in those days. Thiruvarur, see, Veena Dhanammal, who never taught anybody anything, willingly taught Rajai music. Because Dhanammal always felt that you had to be worthy of becoming my disciple. You can't be just coming over to me and saying, I want to learn your music. So somebody, only if you displayed a certain amount of dedication, that is, and you also had to suffer her insults and her barbs and all. The famous story of, Papa Venkatramaya going to her, and then she flings a dabba of, this Vettalapaku to him, and Papa says that, I don't chew beetle leaf. She says, no, I have to suffer your bad breath for 45 minutes, so you let it. Then, the other story of Musiri and Parur Sundaramayyar going to learn music from Dhanamma. And the first song is Ananda Bhairavi. Pahi Sri Giriraj Sute. So, Sa Pa Sa is how the song really begins. So, Musiri, Pahi Sri, that's how he sings it. So, in Carnatic music, you're not supposed to shake on the 3 cardinal Sa, Pa and Sa. So, she was blind by that time. Those blind eyes turn towards where Musiri is sitting and says, Musiri by then, great artist, Ayire. முதல்ல சாப்பா கத்துடுவாங்க அதுக்கப்புறம் இங்க வந்தா போறோம். So that was the kind of woman. So she taught Rajai music. She voluntarily went to Rajai's house and taught her music because she believed Rajai was a great talent. When Rajai died, it broke something in Dhanamma, and she became a very introverted, even more of an introverted personality after the death of Rajai. You had Mylapore Gauri, who could sing as well as dance, and of whom I have said much. Now this is the courtesan community, as I was talking to you about. When do the other caste women get into performing? That happens in 1909, when a woman called C. Saraswati Bai takes to the stage for the first time. Now Saraswati Bai, the whole story is so full of drama in the first half, and then completely devoid of drama in the second half. So I'm not going to bore you to death, but then the story is that her father was a very ordinary station master in a station called Gutti. How many of you are familiar with Gutti? All of us who have been on the Bombay Madras line know Gutti. He was a station master in Gutti, and one night a dying man was offloaded from the train. This is sometime in the 1890s. Man is dying of cholera. The train has uniformly voted that it cannot keep him there because the infection will spread. The servants have abandoned him. The station master and his wife pick up the dying man and take him home. And there they cure him. And when he becomes normal, he reveals himself to be the richest man in Madras. Moddaverapur Dera Venkata Swami Naidu of Dubash of Parry and Company. And he says, what the hell are you doing here as a station master? Resign tomorrow. Come with me. And so he takes the whole family to Madras, where they live in Luz House. In Krishnasamy Avenue. That's where they live. And then this girl is very small. Now Venkateswamy Naidu's granddaughter has to be taught music. In those days, when your daughter or granddaughter learned music, you never let her alone with the music master. So you always had widowed grandmother or you had uncle. Somebody would be seated around. So in this case, they decided that that girl can't learn music alone. So Saraswati has to learn music along. So the Hindustani master, because the whole of Buchi Babu and Venkateswamy Naidu family, they loved Hindustani music. So she learns Hindustani music. Then one day when she is singing at home, a Sanskrit master walks down and says, such wonderful music I have never heard, I am going to become her tutor. So he is Pandit Krishnachar, who becomes her tutor thereafter. And then there is a Egmore Ladies Recreation Club, which is still there in this Raja Muttaya Kalyana Mandapam behind it. So there, all the rich women of Madras congregate. Saraswati goes as a companion to Buchi Babu's wife. Now all the women know that she can sing, so they make her sing. She sings all the songs she knows over a period. Then one day she tells her Guru, I have sung everything, I don't know what to say. They'll keep asking me every Thursday when I go there. He says, I'll tell you how to recite a story with music. She doesn't realize it, but she's doing the first Harikatha for a woman. And she goes there and performs it. And some men have also come to attend the performance. Next day the news spreads all around. And there is a whole reaction to it. All the male performers of the Harikatha community, they put up a petition saying that if any accompanist performs with Saraswati, they will not be given any chance. Secondly, women are ritually impure 3 days in a month. How can they recite the stories of the Lord at that time? Any accompanist who comes along will have to have prayashchittam done. That is, he'll have to expiate for his sins. Thirdly, the master who is taking so much of interest in her is obviously sleeping with her. So they write a letter to the principal of the Madras Christian College saying that this woman has got she's only 11, okay. She's got no character. She's carrying on with this Sanskrit teacher who is teaching Sanskrit in your college. You have to dismiss him from the employment. But the college does not take any cognizance of it. Then 1 year later, her first public performance happens, when the police has to be called in to keep law and order outside the venue. She gets 450 rupees for that performance, when the average Harikatha compensation was 150 rupees. And from then on, trailblazes a great career in Harikatha. When she died in 1974, nobody remembered that she was the great pioneer who had shown that women from other castes could take to performing, and it was not necessary for a courtesan, for a woman to be a courtesan if she had to perform. Now Saraswati had shown the way. And then Bengaluru Nagaratnama decided that if a young child can do Harikatha, I can do it even better. So Nagaratnama, who was a highly competitive woman, decides that she will also do Harikatha and makes a success out of it. And then at that time, in Triplicane, very close to where Saraswati lives, Saraswati lives in Big Street, this woman lives in Carr Street. She's a child bride who is just around 11 or so. When she was young, she had been singing at home. When a mustachioed figure wearing a turban had come inside, danced with her, sung Aduvome, Paddu Paduvome, and then vanished. That was Subramanya Bharati. This was Vaimu Kodenayaki. Vaimu Kodenayaki, married to Vaitamanidhi Mudumbai Krishnamacharya at a very young age, was totally illiterate, but could tell stories beautifully. So the mother-in-law told her that you have to write down these stories. Now Vaimuko did not know how to write, so the neighbor's daughter would come and note down what Vaimuko. That's how she wrote her first story, by not knowing how to write, by dictating it to a friend. And then the story became so popular that ultimately the husband and the mother-in-law all encouraged her, and they bought a defunct magazine called Jagan Mohini, and Vaimu Kodenayaki became the first woman publisher in Tamil. And she was also able to sing very well. So Nagaratnama arrives at Vaimuko's house and says, this girl has to be allowed to perform in public. So the family is a little, they are very all for encouraging her, but they are afraid of a public backlash. So Nagaratnama says, na in the ponnu pinadi okkandu tambura podren, yenda badava vande enna solran. So Nagaratnama, who was 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet, sits behind Vaimuko playing strumming the tambura, and Vaimuko is launched off as a performing artist. Later, of course, becomes a freedom fighter, several other things. So she was several women rolled into one, becomes a very close friend of Saraswati Bai, each one helping the other during times of difficulty. Saraswati Bai writing frequently in Jagan Mohini, several women writing in Jagan Mohini, a remarkable life. So, you know, the upper caste women have got into performing by 1911, 1912. Then in 1927 comes the abolition of the Devadasi system, spearheaded by Muthulakshmi Reddy. So, you know, I have told you about Dhanamma, Nagaratnamma and all that. So, you can't just run away with the idea that this was a great profession and, you know, they were making money. There was a lot of poverty, and I said there was a lot of malpractice. There was a lot of exploitation of women in this entire system. And Muthulakshmi Reddy, who was born of a Devadasi, knew it better than anybody else. She becomes, as I said, a doctor, goes back to practice in Pudukkottai, does not get married, mother very anxious, says, I will only marry a man who is a doctor, who gives up his practice and comes and lives in Pudukkottai. So finally, Dr. Sundara Reddy arrives in Pudukkottai, marries Muthulakshmi, and as she writes, marriage happened exactly as per my wishes. So you know what kind of a personality she was. And then they come back to Madras after a few years when she becomes the Deputy Speaker of the Madras Legislative Council, the first woman parliamentarian in the history of India, and becomes the first Deputy Speaker of the Madras Legislative Council and brings in the Anti-Notch Bill. And that is when the Devadasi system is brought to public notice, and that there is a necessity for a debate on this whole thing. The Devadasis, led by Bangalore Nagaratnamma, they join up together and they form what is known as the Association of the Devadasis of the Madras Presidency. And they decide that their profession has to be, the highlights or the good points about their profession has to be discussed in public. And so there is a huge debate, but in those days, you could not go to court. Today, if there is a issue on transgenders, what do? You rehabilitate them. That is what you do. You recognize that they are also an integral part of society and you work towards making them useful to society. That's what happens. But in this case, that just did not take place. The whole system was outlawed by one act of law. And a whole community was taught to be ashamed of itself. And with that, several music and dance pieces went out, several musicians went out of the field, and the loss was that of Carnatic music and of dance as well. Now, during this time, when people like Nagaratnamma were highlighting the positive aspects of the courtesan system, there were other equally powerful personalities who were highlighting the negatives of it. So you had this famous lady called Moovalur Ramamritam Ammayar, who later became a part of the Dravida Kazhagam and later the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam as well, who went to as many places as Nagaratnamma did to conduct public meetings. She was a woman who had come out of the Devadasi system herself to talk about the negatives of it. So there was a huge debate in the 1920s and 30s, which ultimately ended with the abolition of the system. This is the memorial of the Devadasis of Madras Presidency. This is a note that they give to the Madras government in 1927. It's still preserved in the Tamil Nadu archives. Then we have another remarkable character, K.B. Sundarambai, who at the age of 7 or 8 is taken by her mother with all her siblings to the river Kaveri. Mother says, where are we? Daughter asks the mother, where are you? Where are we all going? Mother says, I'm going to drown you all and I'm going to drown because there is no money. We have no future. We have come to the end of our useful existence. All of us are, there is no tomorrow. Whereupon the child hugs the mother's feet and says, don't do this. We will find a way to survive somehow or the other, and takes the mother home along with all the siblings. And then sings in public, is recognized by F.G. Natesa Iyer, and is then made to get on to acting in plays. By the age of 18, is running her own drama troupe entirely of women artists, and has travelled to Burma, Sri Lanka and Malaysia, and is a force to reckon with. And then lives with S.G. Kittappa without marrying him. And when he dies, declares herself to be a widow. Becomes a freedom fighter along with Kittappa on the encouragement of Satyamurthy. And then, of course, the first woman legislator post-independence to be elected, to be first artist to be nominated to a legislature in India post-independence. So that was K.V. Sundarambai. And of course, by the time you have people like M.S. Subbulakshmi and all coming in, there is a very interesting flux. So the women from the other castes have taken to performing. The courtesan community has moved on. It is no longer there in the field. It's completely vanished. it is more or less become normal, how do you call it, de rigueur. Sushi, this morning we had a discussion on its pronunciation. So it's become de rigueur to become highly Brahminized in your performances. So MS, for instance, who came from the Devadasi community, becomes completely transformed into a Brahmin woman. And you also have a new problem that never existed till the Devadasis were around, the appendage called the husband. What do you do with him? He can make or mar the career in every way. He can make it or mar it by existing, he can make it or mar it by dying, by running away, by anything. But he began to have an inordinately large role to play in the entire concert career of the woman, which was a new problem. Women like Bala Saraswati and Dhanamma and all would have laughed at this kind of a situation. In fact, there is that famous story about somebody asking Bala Saraswati, who was a close friend of MS, saying, Kunjama Patlam Pati, Havadai po Papatiya Putale. Reaction from Bala Saraswati. So you know what it is. So the point here is that here was a case where a husband played an exceedingly useful role, but hijacked an entire career and took it only in the direction that he wanted it to go, with a brilliant artist becoming totally subservient to the dictates of the male. But MS's arrival in Madras also witnessed its own kind of apartheid, because she arrives in Madras and is not allowed to perform in Gokhale Hall, because Annie Besant has said no woman from a Devadasi origin can perform inside Gokhale Hall. So they have her performance in a small Kalyana Mandapam on the opposite side called Saundarya Mahal. Today, 10 years later, if MS had wanted it, any venue would have been thrown open to her. But this was the kind of difficulty with which they came in. Now, at this time, you have a couple of others who, I just wanted to kind of establish the contrast, and that MS, who came from a courtesan community, becomes completely Brahminized, even in her speaking, subservient to the husband and all that. You have NC Vasanta Kokilam, who is a Brahmin, who moves in the entirely opposite direction, who, having come into the field as an artist, has got no husband because the husband has been abandoned a long while ago, arrives in Madras as a single woman, and then lives with a patron called C.K. Sadasivam, also known as Sachi. It's a highly exploitative relationship, but she can't break out of it. He makes films with her, but he takes her money, and she is exceedingly unhappy about it. There is a loss of status for a woman to have been of Brahmin origin, to have then gone down in that direction. So Vasanta Kokilam is not really accepted, but at the same time is a very, very popular artist, but never acquires the kind of stature that M.S. Subbulakshmi did. Unfortunately, got tuberculosis at a very young age and died when she was around 32 or 33. But the interesting thing is that when Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi was going to attain Mukti in Tiruvannamalai, Vasanta Kokilam travels there to sing, and there is a question as to how a woman of her morals can come and sing in the Madam. And Bhagavan is the person who says, no, she has to be allowed to sing. And so she sings, she performs in front of him and then returns. So it is very interesting that M.S. Subbulakshmi has reached a certain height where nobody can question anything about her, but Vasanta Kokilam has reached a certain depth where people are even questioning this. And both compatriots, fierce competitors at one time, and also this Sadasivam was no match to that Sadasivam. That's the whole thing. Rajam Pushpavanam, who was always remarked about for her uncanny resemblance to M.S. Subbulakshmi. And as is very often spoken, probably MS was the daughter of Madurai Pushpavanam Iyer, who was the real who was the father of Rajam Pushpavanam in any case. MS herself, towards the end of her life, used to keep talking quite often about Rajam Pushpavanam and say things like, etc. Now Rajam became a great singer, became a movie actor, one of the earliest women in Madras to drive a car, then married her cousin who was a doctor who made her give up her career. The husband died young. Thereafter, widows had no space on the performing platform. They were inauspicious. And so she had to spend the rest of her life teaching music, taking care of her children, and that marked the end of a great career.
I'm her son.
You're the man. I've never met you before,
Yes.
but I've spoken to you several times on the phone.
Wow.
Great to have met you, sir.
His son.
You must hear Rajam Pushpavanam's recordings. Very, very interesting. Very, very talented musician. Now in 1931 rather, there is this young child who has participated in a school exceedingly orthodox Brahmin family, Dikshita family of Kanchipuram. So this girl has performed in a school play and has sung well. And the Swadesa Mitran correspondent has taken a photograph of this girl and published it in the newspaper. Next day the family is in mourning. The father says, no, nobody will marry your aunts, there are 7 of them. You have sullied the family image by getting yourself photographed for the newspapers. What is going to happen to us all? Nothing, and we are finished. Whereupon the school mistress Ammukutti Ammal goes to the house and convinces them and says that nothing, the heavens have not fallen. Your daughter is obviously meant to rise to great heights as a musician. Now the uncanny identification of this girl as a musician was done when she was 1.5 years old. She had been taken to Ramanashramam as a baby in the hands of her mother, and Ramana Maharshi, who never looked at anybody, asked for the child to be brought and poured 2 drops of honey into her mouth. So he had recognized something, obviously. So now, when she was born in 1990, next year is going to be this lady's centenary. In 1931, she is learning music there. And then, the time has, she comes to Madras to give a concert performance at the same Egmore Ladies Recreation Club where Saraswati Bai had once broken the taboo. And then she goes back because father is still very uncomfortable about the fact that the girl should perform in public. And who goes 8 times to Kanchipuram to convince him? Vaimu Kode Nayaki, who took to performing because Saraswati took to performing because Nagaratnama forced her. Vaimuko goes 8 times to Kanchipuram to convince Patamal's father. Patamal then becomes a concert artist. Patamal's husband was a book by himself, but I'm not going to talk about it. I will leave it at that. And then comes the Music Academy in 1927, and by 1931 its first conferences have begun. That is when dance is saved, because as I said, the courtesan system has been outlawed. What is going to happen to the dance? That becomes a major issue, and a man comes to the forefront, E. Krishnaiyer, who along with Rukmini Devi Arundel kind of ensures that dance is brought back to the public platform, encourages in this particular venue, which is today known as Ramarao Buildings, encourages the first 2 Devadasis to perform in public, outside a temple and outside a house of a rich man. The Kalyani daughters, the daughters of Tiruvalapputtur Kalyani, they give the first performance in 1931. Rukmini Devi Arundel is in the audience, witnesses it, and decides that she must learn dance. And that is how dance takes on a completely different career. I'm coming to the last 2 slides of my presentation. As I said, Patamal's husband was a strange bird, but I will not go into that. Now we come to the last 2 great women with whom I want to conclude this presentation. Madras Lalitangi, who was a Brahmin girl given in adoption during a famine to a Devadasi woman, becomes the adopted daughter of Perumal Kovil Narayanammal, and then becomes the companion of Uttanur Ayyasamy Iyer, who was a great musician, scholar, more of a scholar than a musician. And their daughter is M.L. Vasanta Kumari, whom you see here at the age of 13. Now, Lalitangi in 1937 or 1935, whenever it was, there is a Dasa from Karnataka who comes down to Madras and sings the songs of Purandara Dasa. Lalitangi learns it from him, and she and Ayyaswamy Iyer, they decide that they must publish the songs of Purandara Dasa. They have no money because they've just lived on teaching music, and Lalitangi is a performer, but she's got asthma, so her career is not very great. So they sell whatever land they have in order to fund a book to propagate Purandara Dasa songs. The Hindu gives the paper free of cost. Rangaramanu Jayangar writes the notation, and then Lalitangi releases the book when Vasanta Kumari is 13. This is a photograph taken from that book. At the age of 13, she had notated a full book along with her mother, and she had released it. With her, Carnatic music kind of comes full circle. Now, Patama kind of broke forth and began singing Pallavis. She demonstrated that women were as good in singing Tanam, as good in singing Pallavis as any men. In fact, she became known as Pallavi Patama. She broke that barrier and said that, look, come and listen to what I am performing in order for you to understand. Vasanta Kumari took it to its greatest heights. And thereafter, there could have been no question as to whether a woman musician was in any way inferior or unequal to a man. And Vasanta Kumari also had a flourishing career despite a husband who was not exactly an asset, and lived despite him, became a great success and proved that, of course, there was a lot of personal unhappiness, which I don't have to go into in this presentation. But she was able to prove that as a professional, she could hold her own independently without a man managing her career, which was not true of MS or of Patama or anybody. This, in my opinion, marks the culmination of that entire journey of the women musicians, which began in Tanjavur when Rajaraja kind of inscribed something on a wall and dedicated 400 women to a temple. This marks the end of that long journey. Thank you very much. Penny?
So, Sriram, Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy is the first woman medical professional in the whole country.
Yeah, MBBS. The LMPs, there were women before that. But as an MBBS, yes, she is.
What I've heard of is she had really enough struggle to learn, because the professors were not interested to teach the women.
True. And even in school, when she was admitted to the Pudukkottai Raja's school, there was a protest that she would corrupt the boys in the class and that she should not be let in. So the Raja had to legislate to permit her to study in that school. So it was a big fight. I mean, not an ordinary struggle under any circumstance.
And even the Cancer Institute is
totally founded by her and start,
Vaibu Kodinaiki is better known as a writer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
now-
also has recorded music, has released gramophone, has performed, known for her music as well.
Do you know who was the person who wrote it for her initially?
I forget her name now. I think it was a woman called Patama, but I am not sure. But it's there in the document. The neighbor's wife.
Ishwara Iyer, Patama's positive or negative?
Someday over a cup of coffee, I'll tell you about
How you know
it. Very difficult man. Exceedingly difficult. And so, that was also a case of total subservience to the husband. Total. No way could any question be asked. His
But
word
that's-
was law. So, they very simple things like, for instance, there was a time when Patama's mother had come to visit Patama. She was a widow. Because she was a widow, Patama's mother would be kept in the back room and, everything would be taken to her. But Ishwari's mother was also a widow. She would be sitting in the front room lording over the entire household. So that kind of double standard would go on all the time.
I've seen Rajan, my mother and MS Lakshmi together. So my mother used to take me to her house. And I was amazed at the likeness. They were like twins. They were like twins, different mothers, how they were looking so alike, amazed.
Do the newspapers of those times record all this? Do you
Record
find-
what?
Yeah, do you find all this in the archives, like since, say, the 1900s?
Their performances are like, this so and so performed here at this
Not all
venue.
the
that.
stories.
For that you have to keep reading, and there are some musicians who've written about their lives also. I've left out a very remarkable personality called MS Soundaram, who left her husband and went off to teach music in various places. So, and her biography is one of the frankest. It would be a bestseller if it was released today. No holds, no inhibitions of any kind about ill treatment, about the behavior of male musicians towards women and all that, and all written in the 1950s.
Tamil or English?
Huh? Tamil. It's called Yenadu Ninaivu Kadal by MS Soundaram. There is a copy in the Roja Muthaya Research Library. And when you read it, you get to realize that several of our pillars of music society were not really pillars. They were pretty badly behaved in their life.
Women musicians were paid very well in those days, very high.
No, in comparison to the male, the women musicians were paid less. It was Saraswati Bai who kind of broke that by demonstrating that she could get 3 times what male musicians
Because my
could.
mother said that she used to get 1,000 rupees for one.
By that time it had changed. See, I'm talking about before the arrival of Saraswati.
Those days.
Yeah, a big sum.